ultimately, if you look at the artists who blow up, right, it's not because they're doing what everyone else is doing, it's because they're doing themselves uniquely, like, and authentically.
Yeah,
So I
exactly.
mean, that's what you're saying now. It's like, be
dude,
authentic,
totally.
be real, be yourself, and be like, I actually have a story to tell.
Yeah.
Here's my story.
100%. Like, authenticity is the number one way to sell yourself.
Right.
If you making this like stencil rap or bubblegum rap and you trying to sound like Travis Scott, you're trying to sound like Lil Baby, that's weird when you export it outside of South Africa,
Totally.
right? That's why the world is going crazy for Amapiano,
100%.
right? I always tell our students, and we get into these type of conversations all the time, and I said to them, I was like, this is now a little bit before Amapiano was a thing. I was like, one of our big exports genre-wise is Kwaito music.
Right.
Imagine Drake had to make a Kwaito song. Would
Yeah.
that not be so
Yeah.
weird for us to
Yeah.
consume?
And people would be slightly offended.
Right? Now, that's what America sees
For sure.
when they hear our hip-hop. They're like, we don't quite get it. Why is it that the only, like, South African rappers that have really penetrated overseas has been Nasty C and Blackie? Because
Yeah.
they sound so Americanized, and no hate, that's what
Yeah.
they're doing, that's the style of music they make. If they want to sound American,
Yeah.
I'm behind them. They're still ripping that SA flag regardless of how
Sure.
they sound, what they look like, what they're doing, right? And I always tell them, I'm like, even Nasty had to make an album called Zulu Man with Some Power
Right.
when he went to the States to represent himself, because at the end of the day, where you come from is like,
Is important.
it's so important, and it's the thing that sets you apart,
right.
And I look at like how Afrobeats is blown up. I look
Yeah.
at how Amapiano is blowing up, right? And
And
it's
that
because
was-
it's different.
That was sort of what happened with Zola 7 after Tsotsi.
This is also what happened with POC.
Yes.
So POC started making hip hop, but they were using Guma samples. They were using
Yeah.
South African samples, South African jazz, Afro jazz samples. And that's a thing that made them stand out. And they aligned themselves with the Black consciousness movement of the time that was
Yeah.
happening globally in the world. And that's why people were interested in hearing the story from these guys from Southern Africa who are going through a similar struggle as they were going through in the States at the time, but they sounded uniquely South African.
For sure.
And
For
I
sure.
feel like that's what made them, that's what made all these doors open for them.
100%.
How they could go on tour with the Fugees, how they got to meet Africa Bambaataa. And I feel like a little bit of that has been lost in our hip hop game right
Yeah.
now. Guys are forgetting that authenticity, like, there's so many people making music at the moment.
For sure. And it's so easy to get music out right now.
Exactly.
Whether it's good, popular or not.
Exactly. So it's like your story has to be so good and your sound has to be so good for you to really get somewhere. And then at the end of the day, you also just a pick from South Africa, which
For
is
sure.
one small country on the big continent of the world,
Yeah.
right? So if you're not authentic, if your story isn't authentic, if you're just making tracks to try and get onto charts, get onto radio, get views on YouTube, you will eventually fizzle out. And
Yeah. And you get
disappear.
lost in the sea of sameness.
Yeah.
You know what I
That's
mean?
the thing. Kanye said once, like, if you surround yourself by people who think they know who you are, you'll ultimately forget who you are.
Totally.